Okay, so let's get right into it. What happens when a government gets a bill it just can't pay? And I'm not talking about a small deficit. I mean a colossal World War-sized bill. Something so huge that taxes and normal borrowing don't even make it done. Well, that's when things get really extreme. Because you're pushed to the edge. You're basically left with two very different, very dangerous choices. And this quote, wow, it's from a guy watching the chaos unfold in Austria back in the 1920s, and it just nails what happens down one of these paths. He says people are like sailors on a sinking ship, just ripping up the decks to build their own personal rafts. You see, when a government torches its own currency, it's not just some abstract economic thing. It's a complete collapse of trust. It's every person for themselves. I mean, just look at this number, 41 quadrillion percent. That's a number with 15 zeros. This is what that breakdown actually looks like. In Hungary, right after World War II, this was reality. Prices were doubling every 15 hours. Just think about that. Your money was worth half as much by the time you went to bed as when you woke up. It's a speed of collapse that is almost impossible to wrap your head around. And then there's this, a $100 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. I mean, come on. When you need a note with 14 zeros on it just to buy a loaf of bread, money has become completely meaningless. It's like a bad joke, except it's ruining people's lives. All right, so this brings us to path number one. Let's call it the money wildfire. Here's the deal. The government is broke, can't tax more, can't borrow more. So what does it do? It just turns on the printing press. Brrr, creates money right out of thin air. Sounds pretty simple, right? An easy fix. But as we'll see, that little spark can ignite an inferno that burns down the whole economy. Now, there's actually a technical term for this wildfire, hyperinflation, and the official definition is when prices rise by more than 50% in a single month. Now, 50% might not sound that crazy, but hold on. A 50% monthly inflation rate means prices multiply by nearly 130 times in just 1 year. That's the red line. Once you cross it, you are officially in the economic danger zone. So how does it get so out of control? Well, it's a vicious cycle, a real death spiral. Here's how it works. Step one, the government prints money. That floods the market and prices start to tick up. Step two, people notice. They see their money is losing value, so they lose faith in it. And what do you do with something that's losing value? You get rid of it. People start spending their cash the instant they get it. They want real stuff, food, clothes, anything, not a piece of paper that's going to be worthless tomorrow. All that frantic spending just pushes prices up even faster, which forces the government to print even more money to keep up. See, it just feeds on itself. And the human toll here, it's just devastating. Imagine your parents' or grandparents' life savings, everything they worked for their entire lives just gone. Poof, vanished in a matter of months. Now, on the flip side, all your debts get wiped out too, which sounds good until you realize the entire system has just collapsed. Money is so useless, people literally use it as wallpaper. You're forced back to bartering, trading chickens for shoes, or you start using a more stable foreign currency like the US dollar just to buy groceries. Okay, but here's where the story takes a twist. Because when the US faced its own impossible bill, we're talking the astronomical cost of fighting World War II. It had that same temptation. The printing press was sitting right there, but it didn't pull the trigger. Instead, the US chose a totally different route, a much more controlled path. So what on earth did they do instead? So if hyperinflation is a wildfire, the path the US chose was more like building a cage. Instead of letting the market run wild, they decided to tame it, to lock it down. The official name for this is yield curve control, but I like price peg. They decided to peg the price of money. And this is the key difference, so listen up. The US central bank, the Fed, didn't just print cash and give it to the government to spend. No. Instead, it used its immense power to fix interest rates on government bonds. They basically said, this is the price the government will pay to borrow money, period. This made it super predictable and super cheap for the government to borrow all the trillions it needed for the war. And that, my friends, is yield curve control in a nutshell. It's the central bank drawing a line in the sand. They look at, say, a 10-year government bond and declare the interest rate on this thing will not go above 2.5%. And how do they back that up? They promise to buy any and every bond necessary to keep that rate from rising. It's an ironclad commitment to the market, backed by a theoretically infinite checkbook. And here are the actual numbers from World War II. This is what the cage looked like. The Fed locked short-term borrowing at a ridiculously low 0.3%. And for long-term borrowing, they capped it at 2.5%. The entire financial system's interest rates were basically frozen in this pattern, completely artificially. But here's the thing about cages. They distort whatever's inside them. And this policy was no different. There is no free lunch in economics, and taming the market had some serious hidden costs. And the real kicker? It wasn't putting the cage in place that was hard. It was trying to take it away. This whole thing sparked a massive power struggle right inside the US government. You had the Treasury on one side basically telling the Fed, hey, just open the fire hydrants and flood the system with money so we can be 100% sure rates stay low. But the Fed pushed back. They were like, whoa, hold on. We're the central bank. We need our independence. Let us handle this with precision. It was a huge fight over who was really calling the shots. And for a long time, the Treasury won that fight, hands down. So this policy, this cage, was in place for almost 10 years. And for a big chunk of that time, the Fed basically became the buyer of last resort. Nobody in the private market wanted to buy short-term government debt at those rock-bottom rates, so the Fed was forced to buy it all up. Finally, in 1951, they reached a legendary agreement called the Treasury-Fed Accord. That's what finally broke the cage and gave the Fed its independence back. But getting out was messy, really messy. The second the Fed let go and interest rates started to rise, anyone holding those old, low-rate government bonds, like big insurance companies, suddenly saw the value of their holdings plummet. They took huge losses. And think about the mortgage market. Its entire business model was built on the idea that rates would never change. When they did, the whole thing was thrown into chaos. We're talking a full-on credit crunch. It got so bad that new home construction actually dropped off. So there you have it. Two paths born out of the same impossible problem. And as you can see, neither of them is perfect. You've got the wildfire that destroys everything, and you've got the cage that distorts everything and is a real pain to get rid of. Let's just break it down, side by side. The money wildfire, you just print money like there's no tomorrow. The result? Total currency collapse. The cost? You wipe out savings and shred the social contract. Now, teaming the market, you cap interest rates. The result? You distort the entire financial market. The cost? The central bank basically loses its independence. See, both get the government's bills paid in the short term, but the long-term consequences are severe and completely different. And don't for a second think this is just some dusty old history lesson. This is incredibly relevant right now. Just a few years ago, the Federal Reserve was publicly digging into this very episode from the 1940s. Why? Because they're trying to figure out what tools they have in their toolkit for the next major crisis. These ideas are very much on the table. And so, that's what it all comes down to, isn't it? This is the big looming question. These problems don't just disappear. Sooner or later, there will be another crisis, another unpayable bill, and the choice will be the same. So, which path will we choose next time? The wildfire or the cage? The printing press or the price peg? History shows us the costs of each, but the future remains unwritten.